Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance is sure to crack your nuts and sugar your plums as we discuss the American perennial Christmas classic, The Nutcracker Ballet, here on Created Things.
Hello and welcome to Created Things, the podcast proudly brought to you by what I don't hesitate to call 20, count them, 20 of the world's twinkliest toes. I'm Father Gabriel Toretta, medievalist, priest, guy. With me, as always, is my friend, my co-host, Jacob Flores-Popcak, artist, psychotherapist, twinkly toe possessor. How are you doing today?
I'm okay, but you did your math wrong because I unfortunately only have 19 twinkly toes. One of my toes was badly damaged in the war, and its twinkle just never came back.
So like you still have the toe, but its twinkle
the twinkle is just gone.
It got twinkle frostbite.
I could have gone pro, man, if it weren't for
but
that
no,
one
only we know, but
non-twinkly
that's
toe.
your fully 1/20th disabled with respect to twinkliness. So that's just not.
Yeah,
it's just not.
The twinkle
not
injury gets me down, man.
I know it's really that's like a made for TV Hallmark movie coming right at you.
I could have tossed that football right over that mountain.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you do with twinkle toes. I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
that's a Napoleon Dynamite reference, but you know.
As I was thinking about that, I was like, actually, gentle reader, I have never counted Jacob's toes, which I think is a good thing. I mean, it's good to be friends, but like, I don't think I've ever sat down and counted any of my friends' toes. So I think this is a good thing. It's a sign of like appropriate respect for boundaries of like self and other, while also still, recognizing that we're friends. Yeah,
that's a personal boundary of mine. Just don't do weird shit with my toes.
Yeah, just don't. Or specifically, don't count them. I mean, just the boundary is don't count them.
I count counting among my list of weird shit, which is why I just don't do math.
Yeah, well, I respect that because that's numbers can only hurt you if you play their game, so you just don't do it. I respect that.
Speaking of numbers, we have not just one of us, not just two of us, but three of us on the podcast today. I'm joined by repeated friend of the show, voice of our outro, producer, dancer, artist, and love of my life, my wife, Jessica Flores-Popcak.
Hey! Hello! I'm really happy to be here.
What's up, girl?
I love hanging out with you guys. I should hope so. Big fan of the podcast. I also should hope so. And
you have all your twinkle toes intact, famously, in fact.
I do. They have had some close calls. Definitely lots of scrapes and bumps I have gathered along the way, but all twinkle toes are intact.
All accounted for. So tell us, the reason we're having you on this episode is because this is a very dance-centric episode, and you're already referencing the injuries you've incurred. Can you give us just like a little highlight reel of your background, why you're a particularly good guest for today's topic?
So I have a background in dance. I trained in ballet and tap and jazz and flamenco.
Nice.
And about every kind of dance you can imagine for about 10 years. And today, I'm actually wearing School of American Ballet. Let's see if we can show them.
Oh, yeah.
Where I went to like a summer program and my sister studied for a while. And I am big fan of dance, big lover of dance. Unfortunately, don't do too much of it anymore, but I'm very excited to be here, share what I know, and get excited with you guys about dance. I've been kind of bothering or whispering in Jacob's ear a little bit about trying to do something on dance. So I'm very excited for this.
Yeah, I think it's a good season for it. I mean, and I think you're underselling yourself. I mean, so you danced in New York for a long time. I've shouted you out for that before. And then, I mean, I remember last year in our parades episode, I gave you a shout out because one of your one of your larger dancing credits was that you were a dancer in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. So
This is true. This
That's
is true.
incredible. That's
Sometimes
incredible.
I even forget that myself. Like, oh yeah, I did that one year.
I guess I did
Once
do
upon a
that.
time.
Yeah, funny.
see,
That's
this
so
is why
incredible.
you need me, because I just remember your accomplishments better than you do.
Husband and accomplish rememberer.
Yeah, there you go.
it's like a brain trust, but specifically for your accomplishments. I respect that.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
Yeah.
Within your brain.
Yeah.
So the reason that we're bringing you on today, Jess, is because we're starting our parade of Christmas episodes here. Hopefully, I mean, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I want to do a couple of Christmas episodes, and one that you and I, Father, were discussing maybe doing last year when we were talking about doing our first ever Christmas marathon. Was just this like weird phenomenon that I think you observed it. Well, maybe you can do more justice to it, but you had sort of observed something about how people approach the arts differently at Christmas time.
And there's
the Nutcracker was your main example.
Yeah, so there's this specific thing that, like, if you're in any big city, particularly in America, like around like heading into the month of December, excuse me, like suddenly you're going to see, if your city is big enough to have a ballet company, you are going to see a ton of really lavish advertisements for, like, as lavish as the budget of the city and its ballet company can process, lavish advertisements in every medium for the Nutcracker, a big performance of the Nutcracker, and then like any level of society that you are plugged into where there may be any kind of collective dance performance, if you are paying attention through the month of December, will be pushing various versions of Nutcracker performances on you. So if you have like kids or like at schools that have like ballet or dance programs, they're going to be performing selections from the Nutcracker. If you have, kids who do any kind of dance, they're going to be doing some kind of selection from the Nutcracker, like regardless of what kind of dance they're doing. And then if you just like wander around town, you'll see, because it's such a strong association at so many different cultural levels, then you'll see all kinds of what you call like second order or like negatively expressed like parasitic versions of the Nutcracker. So it's such an expectation of like the American especially, but North American in general, or at least American in Canada. I don't think it's so strong in Mexico. Experience of like heading into Christmas, that like then there's all these other things. So there's all these like Nutcracker parodies. A friend of mine and I will like swap back and forth. And these are like the very small profile things that'll be like, somebody's printing this out on 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and putting it on a signpost. So the really cheap level stuff. But there'll be, so there's like a hip hop Nutcracker, like a breakdance Nutcracker, a jazz Nutcracker.
In fact, the Reverend runs the hip hop Nutcracker, currently playing on Disney Plus.
See, this is exactly this. So when you want to watch the Nutcracker, but you've got the runs, then you go to this. That's how you do it. No, it's exactly it. Like, so it's just everywhere. And I thought, like, particularly with the Nutcracker, this was a funny. This occurs in all kinds of other media. Like, one could talk about the way that like there's something pretty similar with the Messiah, for instance. Because it's fairly similar with the Messiah in America, but just thinking specifically about the Nutcracker, because like I think the amount of like the number of Americans, like the sort of circle of Americans who have like personal experience with ballet, either from just going to ever see one, or dancing in it or whatever, and then the number of people who will have like experience at the Nutcracker, that's just a circle, like it's not a Venn diagram, it's just a circle. And then like
it's fascinating,
which is so weird that like for us,
it's like every American's maybe like one experience with the high arts or theater arts. Like I teach an after school program, and last week a bunch of the kids were dressed all fancy, and they were telling me all about how they went to see the Nutcracker for their school's field trip.
Oh my gosh.
And this is like a normal thing. Like this happens all over the country. If you go to, I don't know, a pretty decent school, you might end up going on a field trip to the Nutcracker, whether you like it or not.
And these are people who, I mean, whether it's individuals going and buying like tickets to this, or like in your example, whether this is school administrators taking everybody to this is not a group of people who give a crap about the ballet the other 364 days of the year. It's not like the principal, when they're planning out field trips, are saying, yeah, well, we've got to make sure that we see, Swan Lake, and we've got to make sure that we see Blue, and we've got to make sure that we see all these things like all the rest of the year. No, nobody's doing that. It's just like, for some reason, the Nutcracker is not just ubiquitous, it's also obligatory.
Right.
To the degree that, like, I've even talked to people before who I'm like, oh, have you ever seen like ballet? Do you like ballet? And they're like, no, not really. Well, you haven't even seen the Nutcracker? Well, I've seen the Nutcracker.
Well,
right?
of
Like
course. I didn't say ballet, I said the Nutcracker. Hello.
Right. It like represents its own schema separate from ballet somehow.
It's it's incredible. And then there's all these delightful. So when the first time that I ever went to the Nutcracker was at the Joffrey in Chicago, where the
very nice,
which is lovely. It's a really wonderful performance. They have an original choreographed version of their own, which we'll get into is sort of also a ubiquitous part of the its ubiquitous changeability is part of what's so wild about it and fun about it. But so they have a choreographed version of their own that's really quite lovely. It's all sort of based in the it has still some of that same old worldy flair and feel, but it's all based in the like Chicago World's Fair time frame and space and stuff.
Which I do really want to talk about regional or different variations and versions of the Nutcracker.
We got to get there. Yeah, totes. So like,
I think that's what we all want to talk about most.
Yeah, totes. Yeah. But it was just like wild because so that was my first time ever going, because I sort of became interested in ballet a little bit later, and it was amazing because like I went not having any idea about like its sort of cultural place in the American experience, other than just like recognizing that it was a sort of a Christmas ballet, as far as I knew, and
sure, yeah.
And I went, and it was like all of these, sometimes moms and dads, but ubiquitously moms with little girls dressed to the nines. I mean,
my God, the crinoline, just like so much crinoline under these little Macy's dresses that these poor kids cannot even sit down. They're sweating bullets.
But they were everyone the energy was palpable. I mean, yeah, they were ecstatic.
Well, this is the level of
like just a quick analogy for like I'm trying to think of like when have I felt like energy like that, just like sitting, like the anticipation, the joy, just this like raw joy and enthusiasm, and like everyone knows that something special is happening here. I mean, like a sort of a differently culturally placed experience would be like I don't know, when I was a teenager and like the first of the new Star Wars things came out, and like and like that midnight showing before they had like pre showings, when like we stayed up, we waited in the parking lot until like literally 4 a.m. to like or 5 a.m. when they opened up the ticket office, when they and then like so everyone who's in this theater has gotten like 3 hours of sleep, and they spent previous night like in a parking lot to get tickets for this thing, and it's like a really big deal, and some people are dressed up for it, but like everyone is like sort of conceptually in this like very keen space for it. But that took like that was like 20 or 30 years of like sort of like silence and anticipation and building and everything
Right, there's a
in the
hell
making.
of a lot of build up for that.
And then of course it was literally unrepeatable because what came out of it was like a desolating abomination. And so that's like the closest analogy I can think of. And in the end, it's actually fairly distant. Because there's something weird about this like energy repeating every night, like every space where this is performed, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the closest I've come to it, so I may have even mentioned this before. I think I've told you this, but I can't remember if it was on the podcast or not. But so we have a mutual friend who's really, really obsessed with like professional wrestling. And he came out to visit Jess and I, and he strong-armed me into going to a WWE I want to say show because I'm an artist. Match, I guess. I don't know.
And basically, it's a show.
It's a show. And he wanted my opinion afterwards. And I was like, you don't want my opinion, dude. And he was like, no, what's your opinion? I can handle it. I was like, it felt like ballet. Like the crowd was like losing their shit. And it was very choreographed. And it was very like performative and broad. And I was like,
the storyline.
Yeah.
And everyone was like
sort of Shakespearean,
waiting for the next chapter to happen.
Right. It felt very like,
it
felt very like ballet plus toxic masculinity, you know?
That's cool. I'm in both of those things.
But that's just to say, like for people who maybe somehow haven't seen it or something, like that is the vibe when you go to the Nutcracker. Like there is this buzz when you go in, like I felt at literally WWE or at, waiting for Star Wars or Harry Potter to come out or something like that. And yet you're right. Like with those events, there's all this buildup. I mean, like even with the WWE thing, right? They'll build up to that match for months as they sort of, express their hatred for each other in little interviews and stuff like this, right? To build anticipation. But the Nutcracker is literally just midnight of the clock of the year, just every year. Like it just happens there. It's just gonna come. And I don't know anybody who's sitting there in July being like, oh shit, I can't wait for the Nutcracker in December. Oh my God, it's going to be amazing. Like nobody's doing. So how is it able to get the same kind of anticipation that these other media have to build up to for such a long period of time? It really baffles me.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
Jessica, it really is.
I'd be curious to hear about your experience. Like, so I am just going from the presupposition here that as somebody who was heavily involved in dance for 10 years, that like there is just no conceivable way that you did not Nutcracker. So if you could you talk a little bit about that?
Nutcracker so hard, dude.
So probably out of the 10 years I danced, I probably performed the Nutcracker like 8 or 9 of those years.
Oh my gosh.
Like the Nutcracker is one of those things. If you're a dancer of any age, there is a place for you in the Nutcracker. So it works very well for stepping through each level of dance and there being different roles or different things you can do. So growing up in Albuquerque, there was a local dance theater that I was part of, and it was connected to the school I went to. So they would basically involve all the kids, everyone in the school, in the Nutcracker every year. So I have had my full experience of Nutcracker, as well as seeing many performances as well.
Was that something that you guys, like, did you feel the buzz that Father and I are talking about? If not in yourselves, like from the people who were coming to see it, was that something that you guys could kind of ride on? Like compare that to your experience performing other, ballets or other, performances, period. Like what's the vibe both behind, like backstage and also coming off of the crowd?
Sure. So at least from my experience and what I've heard from a lot of other dancers, the Nutcracker is that one thing or that one performance that you kind of dread.
Oh,
You're-
really?
It's like,
okay, sure.
okay, here we go again. You like the music comes on for that first rehearsal, maybe in like October or or September, October, when you start rehearsing for the show. You're like, here we go again. Oh man, we're going to be hearing this all season, not only in rehearsal, but when I go to the mall shopping for Christmas gifts. I'm not going to escape the music. I'm not going to escape the posters. This is going to be my life for the next several months. And it's going to happen year after year. So it's this like, all right, let's buckle up. Here we go. Let's try to support each other and get through this thing again. And my experience backstage was kind of like as much joking and jovialness as possible to make it fun for the cast, because we're doing this thing every year. It's usually the same, and we have to try to make it interesting and fun for ourselves. But for the audiences, there is this joy and excitement. And when it comes to performance time, like that's one of the things that gets you through the shows, because you're getting ready for the show. You see all the little girls and their princess dresses. Maybe at the performance, they're selling like hot chocolate and cookies before the show.
Or delicious cinnamon roasted nuts.
Right. And it sort of
Pre-cracked.
creates this special atmosphere. You see how much everyone's looking forward to it, however much enjoys it. Families, people of all ages coming. And you're kind of like, okay, this is why we're doing this. This is kind of cool, I guess. But leading up to that is usually a lot of like tired dread, like, oh, okay, it's Nutcracker time. Oh, here we go again.
right. Yeah. That doesn't totally surprise me. I mean, even just from thinking about like the Joffrey in Chicago, which is not the world's biggest ballet, but neither is it small. I mean, they're
definitely very well
high
known.
mid-range. Yeah, it's like a high mid-range ballet company in America, and like the Nutcracker is a fourth maybe of their yearly productions. You know, so like
I was actually looking this up, and for most ballet companies, the Nutcracker brings in an average of like 40% of the year's revenue.
Holy crap.
The Nutcracker is a huge moneymaker. So this is why every company does it annually. Most ballet companies have a season, just like any opera company or a theater company. Usually something in the fall, something in the spring, maybe summer. And these will be swapped out with all kinds of different productions. They're usually different every single year. But the only thing that's constant, like every December, is the Nutcracker.
Yeah, come what may.
For most companies.
And
it's just such a big moneymaker.
And unless you're, the New York City Ballet or the San Francisco Ballet, or a handful of others, like you're probably only going to be running 2 or 3 other full ballets the whole season long.
Right.
Then you'll do smaller things, smaller productions, sort of short series of short dances, new pieces, that kind of stuff. But even a pretty well funded ballet is probably only going to have 2 or 3 other full run, full length shows besides the Nutcracker. So that's saying like that's about a fourth, maybe a third of everything you're doing the whole year, every year. So which is to say, like if you're a dancer in that company, your whole life, your whole career.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why do we think in our own experience that this is? Maybe I'm jumping the gun by asking this question too early. Maybe we need to talk about the history of it and regional performances and stuff like this to get insight into it. But it does, 40%, like that actually shocks me. I thought it would be a quarter of their income or a little bit higher, but like That's wild that it's that much.
It's
Why?
very, very high.
Why do people? I mean, I don't dislike the Nutcracker. I like the Nutcracker a lot, but I like ballet, right? Like I actually genuinely enjoy ballet. So I feel like I don't understand why this one stands out to people.
Yeah, it really is a bizarre phenomenon because even after trying to do some research, I'm still a little bit like, why did this catch on so hard? Which I think we should back up a little bit into some history, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah,
let's do that.
And
yeah.
The way I want to do that, though, is Father Gabriel, you kept throwing out that this is such a big thing in North America, and like I want to dig into that because the Nutcracker is a German like fairy tale from the 1800s, French and German, and then it's a Russian ballet, ostensibly. I mean, the American version, George Balanchine and everything, but like. This is like hardcore Europe stuff. Is this not the case in Europe?
Which I guess probably goes into like our history.
Well, yeah, so what I'm asking you, Father Gabriel, is like you're in Bavaria, you're in the Kingdom of Bavaria right now. Like,
Please,
do
I'm
people
in Austria
not
right
pop?
now. Actually, I'm not.
Okay, fair enough.
That's different.
Okay, I don't know things. But do people not pop off for the Nutcracker in Europe the way they do here?
It does not have that. I mean, they do it, but it's a little bit more like the Messiah, actually, which is to say that like,
I always say that the Nutcracker is just like the Messiah.
The Nutcracker is just like the Messiah. Where, for instance, like the Vienna Symphony has one performance of the Messiah, which is I missed it, unfortunately. It was on Saturday because the Messiah is it's one of my favorite sort of classical type pieces. I adore it.
It's the thing about the Messiah. He blink and you miss him.
Yeah, blink and you miss him. But for instance, they're doing 2 nights of performances of Bach's Christmas Oratorio, which is like never performed in America. And I was in I was in Bavaria actually last week, and there it was. I saw that it was similar there too. So it has I would say that it has a certain relative place. I did look this up though. Can I give a thumbnail sketch of the history of how this became like the American Christmas dance?
Sure, dude.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so like briefly. Right. So E.T.A. Hoffman writes this 1816 short story that is
it's so
very
weird.
Vaguely associated. Yeah, and it's like really only it's like very loosely inspires Tchaikovsky's ballet from 1892.
Very loosely.
Very excruciatingly loosely. Okay. So if, however, you have, I will just going to put a shout out right now. Like if you have a dance lover in your life, I get a copy of this book called Nutcracker Nation by Jennifer Fisher. It's this delightful book by that was I think originally based on a PhD dissertation, which normally means boring as all get out and kind of stupid. I know because I'm writing one. It's a marvelous book. It's just about the whole
I don't think
book.
I've heard of that.
It's a scholarly book written very approachably. The entire purpose of which is to investigate exactly this question: like, how did this become the ballet in America, North America, and like how did this happen? And there's of course the whole book is an answer to the question, but the sort of nut of it to be cracked is that basically it comes to America at the end of the 19th and early 20th century already, as you know, with other Russian ballets. It's just like, okay, it's a Russian ballet, you know. It starts to take on a life of its own so it first gets a full season production, not yet at Christmas time, but a full season production just of its own, full length production, in 1944 at the San Francisco Ballet. But then sort of a very critical moment for it, you mentioned this, Jacob, is George Balanchine at the New York City Ballet in 1954. Both cases, this involved essentially making a new piece based on including the plot, a new plot, and of course new choreography and stuff based on the same score. So they're substantially
Yes.
new works, even if they have real connections. But that's fine for ballet. That's fairly standard.
They needed some newness. Could I
Please
add
jump
like
in,
a
yeah.
back note? So when the Nutcracker first came out, 1840, Tchaikovsky, Maurice Petipa, like the big duo, composer and choreographer, back for the Imperial Ballet in Russia. They had just really popped off, I think, with Sleeping Beauty. Maybe Swan Lake had already happened. Nutcracker happened. And even the composer was like, this was not one of our best. Like, both of them were kind of like,
Well, because didn't Tchaikovsky have like a full-on series of suicidal panic attacks during the writing of this thing? Like, I wrote down, I want to find, I wrote down.
Ooh,
an
I
actual
don't remember.
quote from him.
but while you look at that note,
I got it right here.
the Nutcracker,
He said, I've been making vigorous but vain efforts to work on this. Nothing has come but muck. And the Nutcracker has turned into terrifying, feverish nightmares, so hateful that I dare not describe them. I am tortured by the realization that I cannot properly fulfill the task I have undertaken.
That's amazing.
and it was kind of a flop because it was the Nutcracker and they paired it with, I think, an opera. And the Nutcracker, everyone was like, ooh, this is not good. We prefer the opera that's going on. So big flop. So needless to say, leading back to your point, Father Gabe, is it needed a major refresh.
Actually,
for sure.
I want to dig into the flop thing just because this was one of the pieces I found in my, I actually looked up reviews from the original production of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. And
hot.
it wasn't just a flop. Like people were mad it existed. Like one reviewer said, for the woman dancer, there is very little in it. For the art, precisely nothing. And for the artistic fate of ballet, it is one step downward. And then another reviewer said, first of all, the Nutcracker cannot only in only event be called a ballet. It cannot be called a ballet. It does not satisfy even one of the demands made of a ballet.
Oh my gosh.
That's amazing.
So like this thing was reviled.
Yeah, so there was a mood about this. There's a mood.
But then I guess Tchaikovsky, in his bitterness, does like a second cut of the whole thing where he just releases like, I think it was like 8 of the tracks, like 8 of the musical compositions, and just calls it the Nutcracker Suite. And that, I guess, starts getting included in a lot of Russian symphonies. So even though the ballet is hated, the music starts growing in public opinion, which I guess then is what gets taken in this sort of portfolio of Russian ballets to America, which is where you were picking up, Father.
Right. Surprisingly, there is some real significance to its American life that in 1940, Disney puts it in Fantasia. So he takes passages from the Nutcracker Suite and he sets it to like fairly surprisingly good, actually, animated dance from like plants and stuff.
I mean, Fantasia is incredible as
and
far
like
as just like
yeah. Well, so Fantasia itself is so interesting, but it just again for a country that didn't have a high exposure, especially in many places, to like sort of high arts and performing arts and especially ballet and things, it inserts in this really major way this music and its association with dance and its association with a certain amount of frivolity and sort of like openness to like free form stuff and everything that's like kind of in people's minds and in people's ears, and there's sort of, and it had a very formative effect on people. So Balanchine does his own version of it in New York City Ballet in 1954. It starts to become a really big thing, and partly it's important that they're in New York, so they're right next to like where like all the major TV studios are, and they're looking for like Christmas programming and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so 1957 and 1958, Balanchine's production of Nutcracker is broadcast on, I think, CBS on Christmas night. And this is like, this critical mass market moment where like all of America suddenly like
got nutcrackered.
Got Nutcracker, basically. Like, he's exposed to this now.
They got their nuts cracked, you could even say.
One could even say, and so it's so suddenly like everything's, and it's not just that, of course. I mean, there's lots of things coming together, but like you've got this strong association with like culture, rising culture, exposure to high arts, association with a sort of like pop version of high arts, which you're going to be getting from like Fantasia, family, traditional values, sort of fun, Christmas, like all at once. And like basically this is sort of these it's things like this that are all going into the mix that makes this like the definitive, but this is all specifically United States of America and Canada practices, but they have to do with like immigration practices, cultural dynamics, post-war dynamics in these two countries especially. And like interestingly, one thing that this author points out is that like basically in the like 50s and 60s, it's like really in reinforcing and giving a certain expression to this like it's old, but it's new. It's like traditionally family oriented, and it's like kind of it's thematically and intimately sort of wintry. You can map it onto a Christian Yuletide Christmas experience, but it is fundamentally like unrelated to it, absolutely speaking. And so like and then it's like all this like kid friendly sort of centered around children. This like
very bright, very whimsical. There are children in the production. Famously in George Balanchine's Nutcracker, the main character Clara is a little girl. Which in a lot of other productions, sometimes it'll be an adult woman or a more advanced dancer, but it's a little girl who is the main character of the ballet.
Yeah, and this is one remarkable thing that this woman this author is pointing out is that like partly so it's in the 1960s that this becomes cemented in like American cultural milieu and then dance economies as like the Christmas piece. It stops because in the 50s and even the early 60s it's still being produced sometimes in like June, July, whatever, just random times. But by the end of the 60s it's only ever done and always done in Christmas time.
It would be unimaginable to have it any other time of the year. Inconceivable. Yeah, no, exactly right. And she has this interesting point that like this is kind of tied to among other cultural influences sort of feeding into this is that like it's the 60s and the later 1960s, so you're getting a certain turn towards a youth culture, a certain embrace of like the young, and then a certain almost idolization of the young and youth and children and all of this. And then that gets cemented in this really dramatic way in, say, like, for instance, the 80s, when those same like boomer kids who were being sort of like held up and idolized and sort of imagined as Clara and all this kind of stuff. Now they're like handing that on to their children, Oh, sure. Yeah. Who are like, they're like feeding their own inner child and then like also giving their own children this like profound sort of experience of like, again, like the youth culture, the like celebration of like after school activities and all this kind of stuff. So it's like all of these there's this weird way in which the Nutcracker actually sort of represents and encapsulates a lot of the cultural movement of the United States, particularly in its way of experiencing and living sort of high arts and culture from like 1950 onward.
I think pretty subliminally too. I mean, this is me really sort of Freudianly projecting upon it. I recognize that, but I think there's something inherent about the Nutcracker that does represent a sort of post-war obsession with extraness or magnanimity, as you would say, Father Gabriel, or like just kind of over the top finery, right? Because if this were made now, if someone reinvented the Nutcracker now, in fact, people have done, and it has been unsuccessful. Like I think Disney did a live action movie a couple of years ago that was just absolutely trashed, right? And what the ones that really fail all do is they're sort of they invert it, where maybe the rats aren't actually so bad, and like because the rats are obviously the antagonist here. And maybe like in the case of the live action one, spoilers for anyone who would want to see it. I don't know why you would. Like the Sugar Plum Fairy big twist turns out to actually be the bad guy, right? At the end or something like this. Right. But like the actual, like the subtext of the whole thing is very, the triumph of finery over these dirty rats, right? And like the battle is the first half, then we have an intermission. We come back, the rats are dead, and then there's just like all of the different princesses and princes and czars of tasty foods, the peppermint king and the tea queen and the whatever, they all come out and just dance to celebrate the rats being dead. So, to such a degree, and I'm not actually making a claim to this, but to such a degree that if someone wanted to, they could read, because this is a ostensibly a Russian thing, then taken in post-war America and adopted as its own, you could sort of read a subtext of like traditional monarchy and capitalism's triumph over like these dirty little street commie people, like there is that kind of a vibe to it where people are uncomfortable with that, I think, more now, but it gets grandfathered in because of the tradition. And it does, I would sort of posit that something about this show matches what Americans are wanting and thinking of themselves from 54 on, right? When Balanchine puts this out, just this sort of celebration of over-the-topness at the expense of those who would be gritty and mean-spirited and dirty and of the streets, Is that going too far to say? I don't know.
It's an interesting idea. This lovely author is just saying that, like, so part of this is, of course, it's a little bit of an ethnography as well. So she's sort of like interviewing a lot of people who like were either part of Nutcracker or like just watched it or whatever, and so that basically everyone says over and over and over again that like the message of the Nutcracker is that like dreams can come true.
What?
Yeah, which is amazing. And like and that, I don't know, that's like something that's, whether that is accurate or like top, like sort of in the content of the piece or not, is completely irrelevant, because if it's broadly received in that way, it's just broadly received in that way, and we just have to accept that.
Yeah.
And that to me like is a very like second half of the 20th century, very American thing, is that like we want, that's just very charming, that it's like it can map comfortably onto religious experience. It can map comfortably onto ideas about Christmas, both secular and religious notions about Christmas. It maps really comfortably onto like idealized visions of like family time and what you hope for real family time and all these kinds of things. And like it just in every possible way, it just like, this is really served up to be a really delightfully kind of like spread over the culture way of experiencing like the month of December.
Yeah.
So like this is in a certain way. And I mean, like, obviously like dreams can come true. This is a very superficial and sort of frivolous takeaway from or like motivating factor, but it's a motivating factor. And I'm, even to your point, Jessica, like I think it's important that in most contemporary productions of it, it's a little girl, and because part of that is like, well, my little girl could do that, not like in 20 years of like foot breaking labor, but like maybe if she's really good, she could do that in like 5 years.
Yeah. And I think there's something cool about that. And I think that's why we see so many families go, because the parents or maybe the children can see themselves in these roles. And also, there literally are so many children that are in these roles. You get families going to the Nutcracker like families go to a dance recital, because grandma and grandpa have to go see little Jane be an angel,
yes,
and see little Billy be a baby mouse.
Yeah.
So it's not just, it's a family tradition. It's looking forward to these dreams, but then also families coming together to see their little kids in the show, which can be very delightful, and which doesn't really happen a lot, because most ballet companies, you have a professional group of adult dancers, and they have their own productions they do all throughout the year. And so the Nutcracker tends to be the one chance that maybe kids in the neighboring dance school or the dance school connected to the professional company, they're like, this is my chance that I can somehow be a part of this bigger thing. I can be a part of this professional company with real dancers by being a little toy soldier. And
that's actually something I wanted to ask you more about, Jess, from the backstage perspective, because one of the things I had guessed is that, so like one of my favorite ballets of all time is Dracula. I think there's a version of Dracula as a ballet that has almost nothing to do with the book, and it's just a really phenomenal production, but there's a very limited number of roles, right? Like the principal male dancer gets Dracula, the principal female dancer gets the woman he kidnaps, and then there's the role of the priest and the role of her dad and the role of the prince. And then everybody else is either a peasant in the village or one of Dracula's zombie wives who do these incredibly creepy, sort of jilted ballet dances throughout the thing. Just really amazing production. But there ends up being this sort of caste system that there inevitably is in most ballets, where like you got your principals up here and then everybody else is sort of down here. But the Nutcracker is not that, right? Like there are so many amazing roles to be had. You can be the Nutcracker, or you can be, Clara or Maria, depending on, which production you're in. But you could also be Grandfather Drosselmeyer, who's a badass. You could be the Rat King. You could be the king and queen of, what is it again? Tea, peppermint, chocolate, and coffee. I think those are the four, right?
Well, depending on your regional production
right.
and their interpretation of the story.
Right. And then there's, Mother Ginger and all the kids that come out from Mother Ginger's skirts. And it's like, there are just so many amazing characters you could be. And they all kind of get the same amount of screen time, because weirdly, like the Nutcracker and the little girl, despite being the protagonist for the entire second act, pretty much just sit there and watch it happening in the place of the audience. Like they don't really have anything to do, because ostensibly all these, lords and kings of the different sugar and toy worlds are coming to perform for them. So like there is a sort of lovely equality of character where if I would imagine if I'm a dancer and I'm coming home, I feel just as good about getting like the Arabian dance as I do about getting like the Sugar Plum Fairy dance, right? But if my little kid comes home, I can be just as excited for my kid that they got Clara as I can that they got, the Bumblebee, because it's all kind of unilateral. I mean, is that inference of mine? Like, does that resonate with your experience backstage on these things, or was there more of a hierarchy than I'm suspecting?
I mean, I feel like there's always a little bit of a hierarchy in dance. Like there are still the good roles,
right?
That you want to get. But I think the Nutcracker does even it out a little bit. And I think something interesting about the Nutcracker and how successful it is a lot of companies have tried doing other story ballets where they can include maybe children. Like you see, I don't know, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, or Peter Pan, or The Wizard of Oz.
A lot of them, and all of these sort of pantomime-y type,
Right, all of these different story ballets where maybe we can involve more kids, or we can diversify the type of roles in the ballet to maybe make it more accessible to the community. So I think that's something interesting that the Nutcracker Ballet has done for
like dance culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. We don't have a ton of time. We don't have as much time as I'd like for this. So I want to too brutally, but I want to pivot into talking about these regional performances, because I do think that is a key to the success of the Nutcracker. Like, we're talking about how people can sort of project on it that it sort of is this dancing Rorschach test in terms of you can kind of project anything you want onto it. And that definitely is made especially explicit with how creative and kind of local pridey people can be in their interpretations. What are some of y'all's kind of favorite versions of this thing?
Oh my goodness. There are so many. Well, I just want to go back a little bit on what you're saying and say, like,
sure, yeah.
I think it's amazing that, I mean, the Nutcracker is so big and so popular. It does happen every year, everywhere. And it's so easily adaptable that everyone's like, okay, how are we going to make this the tradition of not just the country, but our city,
our local
which is
tradition.
so amazing.
Yeah. How can we make this our own?
Yeah. Like, even in my hometown, they've fully adapted the Nutcracker to be themed to New Mexico. So
that's so
you
cool.
have
Really?
like, instead of there being like, I don't know, peppermint candy canes, you have roadrunners or like really weird Southwestern creatures and treats and things that happen.
They're like specific to kind of a Southwestern Christmas.
Yeah. Which is
That's
really
so
fun
delightful.
and funky.
Yeah.
But you still get the quirky, fun, over the top, magical feeling of the Nutcracker. But it's something that the people of that area can particularly appreciate and understand and fall in love with, and make it feel more like this is our family's yearly tradition. So that's a fun one. Pacific Northwest Ballet in Seattle has an interesting version that uses the original illustrations of the E.T.A. Hoffman's Nutcracker as inspiration for their set and design.
Time of arrival, Hoffman.
Yes, exactly.
What?
Estimated time of arrival,
Yes.
Hoffman. That was his full name.
Yeah, which I find is interesting. So they try to, I guess, dig a little bit more into the weird, quirky, kind of dark feeling of the Nutcracker, and also try to tie that to the actual composition of the music, because we don't have to actually talk about this, but I find fascinating that we have this big, beautiful, romantic period score that has a lot of kind of emotional, maybe a little bit dark sounding songs and music, but it's all behind this very like fluffy, strange, weird, fantastical ballet. And so I think Pacific Northwest Ballet, they try to connect more to the score and reflect that in the dancing.
Yeah, I think that's really great because it does connect. That helps us connect back to the point that you raised, Jacob, or the question you raised, Jacob, about like, you know, whatever certain sort of like socioeconomic implications or backgrounds here, is that like, so at one level you could say like, so there aren't any mainstream like sort of like dark gritty reboots of the Nutcracker, you know, where like we're going to use the same score and it's going to be the Nutcracker, but it's like way dark and it's like, you know, Clara's like a waif child and like, you know, the grandpa is, you know, is this like capitalist pig, and like, you know, nobody will ever do this. And partly, I mean, as a mainstream thing, like I talked about like the small scale sort of like parodic or satirical productions that you get. And like, yes, you get all kinds of stuff like that. But that's, you know, those are for 30-person audiences, you know, or they're small productions for small groups. So partly you'll never do that you will never see that on a main stage in a ballet because it will be economic suicide, because that ballet company would shutter. It would be over that same season and they would never come back. So that partly it's that. But like, you know, there certainly there's a big risk there. And I think that's partly like art critics and stuff can be a little bit dismissive of the Nutcracker because it seems just a little bit too sweet, a little bit too kind of saccharine candy, Christmas dreams can come true kind of thing. But
it's literally all the characters are candy. It's
literally are. In
definition.
fact, this is the tough part. They are literally all candy. But Jess, I think your point is really great because like the score itself actually it's. I mean, this is Tchaikovsky. This is. We're not kidding around. This is superlative music. There is nothing cheesy or campy or overdone about this. There's a lot. I mean, it is a lot of a lot because it's capital R romanticism. I mean, this is Tchaikovsky. This is what you're going to get. But it's majestic music that has an incredible gravitas and dignity to it. And so even in a production that is like very chintzy or whatever, like the music has this incredible drama to it that like in the end, this is a very elaborate and stunningly beautiful and rich work of art. And so even if it's done in sort of a cheesy kind of like, oh, dreams can come true kind of way, like the music remains the music and the dance remains the dance, you know? And like, I think there's actually something very beautiful about that, the way that it you can say like, oh, this is just another example of like American commodification of like high European culture and this kind of stuff. But I might actually propose it as the other way around, or that it's a little bit different, which is that like, yeah, we are looking at like a lot of the kind of like social, economic, cultural effects of like the spread of kind of high culture in America in the post-war period, with a certain amount of like commodification and cheesification, all that kind of stuff. But look what's come out of that is that like everyone knows that the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows like a bunch of chunks of this score, which are which is really fancy and like stunningly beautiful music. You know,
yeah, it's amazing. It's so good.
And I think, you know, to your point that like the high degrees of like local regional adaptation actually allow that to happen rather than fighting against it. You know, I mean, you can think of a bad production that would fight against it, fine. But like, but a well-done production somehow, I mean, you're looking at a real kind of enculturation here where you can really make this your own local thing, you know? So like the Joffrey Ballet's version, many of its aspects are fairly different, you know, like it's not a young girl who's at the heart. It's not a small girl who's the Clara figure. If I remember correctly, she's
huge.
She's huge.
11 feet tall.
She's 11. That's before the Christmas tree grows and everything. She's just a giant. And you know, and it's, you know, and it's about like Chicago in the World's Fair time. So there is a little bit of grittiness to it at the beginning. You know, these are like hardworking immigrant children and stuff and everything. But nonetheless, like very, very rapidly it comes into this like very beautiful, not denying the rest of it, but like it comes into this whole very beautiful sort of experience of family and life. And like the World's Fair is this like a series of like iconic images that like give you a way of experiencing your own history in the context of your country's history and your former country's history and your new country's history and all this stuff that's like ends up being really, really cool. Yeah.
The Pittsburgh version that I grew up with is a lot like that. People are fiercely sort of loyal and proud to it. Pittsburgh, you know, this classically the steel city that was founded by these huge tycoons, right? So, you know, the Carnegies and the Fricks and all these guys, right? And so the party itself that starts the show, right? Because Clara is given this Nutcracker at this big Christmas Eve ball. It's all being attended by these tycoons. And,
cool.
And
yeah.
It's the, you know, and then when the toys and the candy comes out to fight the rat army, they're all toys copied from the illustrations of a very specific toy catalog that was released in Pittsburgh in the 40s, and they took all those toys and built like giant
That's so cool.
So there's like a tin elephant riding
cool.
a unicycle that goes around like bopping rats on the head and stuff, and it's like from the illustrations. It's really, really fun. One of the you mentioned the Pacific Northwest version that's a lot spookier. when I was a kid, we had, because like when you get cable packages, I mean, I'm dating myself here, but like when you used to get cable packages, there'd be your main channels that you actually subscribed for, and then there'd be sort of a junk drawer's worth of like random channels that were sort of barely hanging on and staying alive.
Okay.
Corncob TV and stuff like this, right? Well, like there used to be television for artists, which was just deliciously pretentious. And every day in December, they do 25 days of Nutcracker, where every day was a different pro shot of a different Nutcracker production from somewhere in the world. And they would choose the weirdest.
That's actually amazing.
They would do the weirdest ones they could. And the one that stands out in my memory as being like traumatically scary was there's a Maurice Sendak production. Maurice Sendak.
Gosh.
The illustrator of Where the Wild Things Are and all those really macabre, spooky stories. So he did all of the costumes. He did so like the Nutcracker just looming when spooky, maybe it's the same one, looming spooky eyes, and the rats, are very sort of macabre looking and gigantic. And that one was terrifying, but also very cool. It stands out in my memory. And then there's also one going like super viral on TikTok right now that you and I were talking about the other day where, like the little Nutcracker is running around. He's got his like wooden face and everything. And then the big Shyamalanian twist reveal is that his costume sort of flies off when he becomes a boy again. And the whole time it was Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone.
That's actually, the George Balanchine, New York City Ballet production.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, well, but it was a certain year where it was Macaulay Culkin.
It was Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone.
It was actually Macaulay Culkin. That's incredible.
The whole time. It was like, it was Macaulay Culkin the whole time.
Because in that production, like the Nutcracker Prince boy in the second half basically does zero dancing. You could throw in whatever young celebrity boy you wanted. And because, as you're talking about, the New York City Ballet would often broadcast the Nutcracker, it could be kind of a fun little thing to be like, starring
twist
this celebrity in the Nutcracker. But in reality, he does like nothing.
Well,
really.
like that's the first act. You can have a different little boy being the Nutcracker, just wearing like the Nutcracker mask.
Yeah.
And then it just takes off the mask and switches into the celebrity boy.
Exactly.
So I'm holding out for Justin Bieber in the Nutcracker. I need this to happen.
You keep living the dream. That might be too much enculturation. But I do like you're bringing in our whole North American twist here. Canada, America, commodification, making mistakes with your lives. You're really, you're doing it all at once here, which I like.
Justin Bieber, very famous Canadian, so it all works out.
So it all works out. Well, listen, there is a ton more to say here, but I'm afraid we have to wrap this up. But Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. It's always a delight being able to talk with you, and then it's particularly a delight being able to. We've been hoping to talk about this topic for a long time, and being able to talk with you with your actual experience of having like done a deep dive into this from your own experience is just really, really great.
I've served my Nutcracker time.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know. I just say I propose to those who are listening that that there is something really wonderful here about this. That even that we're showing like the real face of what you can call this scholar I was talking about called an invented tradition, which is that like, it really is invented in the 1960s, but now it becomes a real thing. And like now every time that we do it, we are really like enacting this as a really concrete living tradition that's important for our culture and for who we are and like how we live together and how we think about our shared space and time and lives and things. And I think there's something really wonderful about that because you see it in all of its ugliness, like it's kind of the commodification, the whatever you want to talk about it, the frustrations as a dancer, its difficulties, its overemphasis in the place of like the ballet world in America and all this kind of stuff. And good, like it's good. Like let's attend to those things because they're helpful to think about. And they do not in any way detract from like the splendor and beauty of this shared reality, which is extremely local for as being totally universal as it is in the North American context. It's also like extremely local, and it takes its power from like me doing this and like me, you taking your kids there and like you being a part of this dance world, and then like you think your little girl thinking like, oh my gosh, that could be me, or like this and this and this and this and this, and that I think is really like this is the joy and the power of the art that like is actually given to us to make and to participate in and to celebrate together, which is that like it is this broad reality. It is this thing that we're sort of touching our toes into to twinkle. And for better and for worse, all at the same time, this is actually the art that we're given to make our lives out of. And that's just in everything that we do with the kind of little invented traditions that we have in our individual family and friend groups. These are the arts of our lives. So with that, I say go forth and make cool things.
This has been Created Things, a production of Art, Soul, and Mind, hosted by Jacob Flores-Popcak and Father Gabriel Toretta, produced by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores-Popcak. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on this podcast and the artists featured, follow us on Instagram at Created Things Podcast and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are streamed.